Okay. My name is Chito Jusi. I'm the head of media strategy for media strategy and insights at Kantar Singapore, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar, Maximizing Brand Impact. So if we're going to continue now, hang on, let me put up my screen. Sorry, apologies for that, some technical difficulties. There you go. So some housekeeping reminders before we start the webinar. I just want to remind everybody that all participants will be muted while we continue with this, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A tab found at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to your questions later during the webinar because there will be a discussion phase at the end of the presentation. And then external recording of this event is not allowed. Please don't do that. If you have any questions or if you have any need for any info that's presented during the presentation, just approach SPH or Kantar and we will see what we can do to accommodate you. Cool. So before we begin the webinar, I'd like to introduce you to today's panelists who are joining me to help address some of the queries that we have. So I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Yang Hui Cheng. She is the head of strategy and special projects for Singapore Press Holdings for the Media Solutions Division. Also joining me is Pablo Gomez. He is the chief digital officer and the head of the media domain for Kantar for Asia Pacific, not just for Singapore. And then finally, we have Vineet Kumar. He is the director of research and insights for Havas Group here in Singapore for both the media and the creative side of Havas. So guys, welcome and thank you for joining us today. And with that, I am going to go begin. So at a glance, what we are going to be talking about this morning is basically to introduce Connect, which is a project, media touchpoint measurement project that we have been working on with Singapore Press Holdings for the last 18 to 24 months or so. We're going to introduce what it is, the philosophy behind the measurement methodology, and then what exactly does the partnership Kantar has with Singapore Press Holdings entail in terms of tangible outputs and content. And then after the webinar, we will have a question and answer portion before we end today's proceedings. Okay, so without further ado, let's continue. Let's begin. So we've all been through the last year and a half, and if there's anything that we have discovered is that things are now even more unpredictable than what they were before. If we thought that before the pandemic, it was already difficult trying to put together an effective media plan, getting media right is now even more difficult. A global study by Kantar says that 66% of marketers say it's tough to assess how well their brand is performing across media channels. And across digital channels, the number is slightly higher at 69% because there are blind spots in measurement. There are walled gardens here and there. You can measure this kind of KPI for Facebook, you can measure this kind of KPI for Google, but it's really tough to measure everything across the board. There's blind spots, there's walled gardens. There's not a lot of standardization in terms of measurements. So getting media right is fairly difficult. Next slide, please. Okay. And when I said that the pandemic has thrown things for a loop, you can see from this slide that marketers were already anticipating changes to their media investments and to their marketing mixes, media mixes by 2021. That is the yellow bar on the right side of each channel. So you can see that a lot of them have already been anticipating changes to their media mix in terms of how they spend across all of the channels. If you take a look at the left side of the chart, you can see that the digital platforms are going to see a lot more investment for this year, and the traditional media platforms on the right are going to see a lot less investment. And COVID coming in has acted as an accelerant to that. So because of them coming in, the changes that marketers are already intending to do for 2021 has been amplified even more. So more digital channels are seeing more investment. Traditional channels are going to see less investment. Next slide, please. And that changes, those changes aren't exactly specific to just one market. In fact, they're happening all over the world. I'm just showing you one slide where it's 5 markets, but we have data for almost all of the markets globally, and it's mostly the same thing. In terms of our consumers, the audiences that we've measured and surveyed in the last 12 months or so, in terms of media consumption habits, a lot of them are going to be increasing their media consumption, at least mostly for the channels, for the stay-at-home channels. So you have television increasing compared to last month. You have a lot of the digital channels increasing um, from last month. Obviously, cinema is going to be decreasing in terms of consumption from the last month or so because most cinemas are still closed. I don't even know when. I know in Singapore they're open now, but in a lot of other parts of the world they're still closed. So even media consumption is changing and accelerating and being unpredictable because of COVID. Next slide, please. So where is this all going? So 49% of marketers are confident in their overall media mix. That's not really a lot. That's just less than half. And to think that's also a 7% decrease year on year from last year. So if they're not that confident last year, they're even less confident this year. So all of them believe that COVID-19 has long-term strategic implications for marketing, hence the unpredictability. The challenge is nobody really knows what those implications will be. And because of that, 53%, a little more than half, are willing to try something new. If you don't know what's happening, might as well try something new in the hopes that it'll stick or that it'll prove to be effective. So what does that mean? There is a need now for something, a touchpoint evaluation system that is holistic, goes beyond measuring audience exposure, and maps out the impact to the different parts of the consumer journey. Because of the unpredictability that we are experiencing now, because the traditional ways of doing things aren't working as well as they used to because of the pandemic, because of the shifting media consumption and the priorities of marketers and advertisers, we felt, Singapore Press Holdings and Kantar both felt that there is a need now for something, a system, a platform, a methodology that basically measures everything and gives advertisers and agencies an apples to apples comparison of how channels work and how channels are going to be effective. And not just paid channels, but basically all the touch points that our consumers and our brands are actually in touch with and are exposed to. So next slide, please. And we said holistic because when you think of yourself as a consumer, when you think of yourself as a buyer or customer, you understand that you are actually engaged or are exposed to the brand, not just when you're going to buy it, but before you're going to buy it and after you're going to buy it. So let's say you're in the market for a car. So before you're actually going to the showroom and buy a vehicle, you actually see a car of the brand of the car on the road that you're interested in. You see a television advertisement on say a sporting event that makes you want to be more curious about that brand, and then you have recommendations by family and friends on what brands or what models of kind of car that you actually should be interested in and should be buying in. So you're exposed to all of that before you even go to the purchase stage. When you're about to purchase, you go to the dealership, you meet with salespeople, and they give you more information about the vehicle you're interested in. You see you hear radio advertising on your way to the shop. You go on your Facebook feed and you see ads on social media or maybe a video of a test drive on YouTube. And then after you've selected your vehicle, after you've basically made your choice, you go to an authorized workshop where you're exposed to the brand again, print ads and tests and reports on the vehicle and other brands that you're exposed to. So there is a ton of touch points where a consumer is exposed to the brand that they are considering or the category that they are interested in. And it's not just all paid advertising. It's basically paid advertising, it's earned touch points, the ones that you don't buy, and own touch points, the sites, the platforms, the brand sites, the car showrooms that brands and companies actually own. So there is a huge there is a huge amount of touch points where consumers experience brands, not just not just the ads that you buy on TV or newspapers. Next slide, please. Having said that, though, not all of these touch points are actually going to be effective for your brand. In fact, only 20% of everything that the consumer is exposed to or experiences has 80% of the impact towards purchasing or making a decision based on that brand. So the key is not to be everywhere. The key is to do fewer things, but do those things excellently and well. So next slide, please. Okay. In fact, of say 100% impact for brands, only 25% of that impact is generated by paid media, 7% by TV ads, but you can ignore that. And the 75%, 3/4 of all impact for a brand or a product is actually generated by other touch points, not paid. It's basically earned touch points and owned touch points. Right. So this doesn't mean that advertising is not important. Far from it. Because what we have learned is that just before a consumer and audience member decides to buy something or make an action, it's basically paid media that drives him towards that decision. But it's not the entirety of the impact. Earned touch points and own touch points also generate impact for your brand. So we also need to uncover the blind spots that help your brand grow and optimize your touchpoint ROI. Okay, next slide, please. And that's where Connect comes in. So Connect is a tool that is a platform that we worked with SPH to maximize touchpoint impact. And it works by answering questions like these. Which touchpoints deliver the most impact on your brand building, regardless if it's a paid touchpoint, an earned touchpoint, or an owned touchpoint? Where are the opportunities to improve and grow? So it dives deep into each touchpoint that the entire category or the entire audience in that category is exposed to, and identifies opportunities to maximize specific touchpoints, whether it's paid, owned, or earned. It also answers questions like how can you improve your brand engagement at individual touchpoints, not just your reach, not just the cost efficiency of buying that touchpoint, but the actual brand engagement with consumers. And what can you learn from competitors? Very important. So Connect will not only tell you if you are doing well in radio, but it will tell you if your competitor is doing just as well as you, worse than you, or better at you at the same touch point. So marketers can take a call whether to continue improving within that touch point or just abandon it completely to your competitors and focus on something else. And lastly, it will also give you an idea of how efficient your marketing spend is. So you might be spending 20% of your budget on, say, out-of-home billboards, but that 20% is only generating 10% of the brand impact. So it will give you an idea of how efficient your marketing spend is from the point of view of brand impact and brand engagement. So next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about the questions that Connect delivers, and we've also talked about the need for a holistic measurement. And the next few slides will hopefully concretize what the output of Connect really means, because we've done this study for 19 categories, 19 advertising categories for the Singapore market. And I'll show you some examples in terms of the output that Connect has done for those advertisers. Next slide, please. So there are 4 key outputs that Connect gives clients and users. The first one is we uncover what drives the category in terms of paid, owned, and earned, the top 10 touch points, the top 20 touch points if you want, and we will tell you how much of that impact is given by those touch points. Identifying opportunities versus competitors. So Connect dives deep into each individual touch point and basically tells you how you're doing against your competitors. Number 3 is improving your touch points. If you've decided that you want to be on one specific touch point, or historically your brand has been on one touch point and you want to see how to improve it better, Connect will show you how to do that too. And optimizing your investments is number 4. So those are the 4 main outputs that Connect as a study gives users, advertisers, and marketers. Next slide, please. We've done this study with SPH over 19 categories, over 300 plus brands, and over 30 plus touch points per category that we measured for in the last 18 months or so. And aside from all the data that we collected, we have done analysis that we have distilled into separate pieces of content that's useful for you guys. Next slide, please. So So the data is accessible on a database that's open 24/7 to all of the users, and it contains all of the information that I just took you through a while ago. And it gives you a lot of different permutations of that data and information depending on what it is that you need. You can take a look at how much time people spend on Facebook on a daily basis. You can take a look at, if you want to just focus on 3 touch points for your campaign, what is the impact on that of that on your brand versus your competitors. You can take a look at if purchase intent is the goal of your campaign, which touch points work best on that sort of thing. So all of that information is available within that database for users at their fingertips. So that's the first one. Next, please. Okay. And no one on I am willing to bet that no one on this call has as much time as they need to do planning, to do strategic thinking, to do campaign development. So what we've done, like a cheat sheet, is basically take all the highlights, all the important points that we felt were there for each category, and basically put them in a PowerPoint deck for a category overview. So the most important things, like which touch points work best for this particular category, what is the impact on awareness, purchase intent, and consideration. All of those things will be available via these reports. One report for each of the 19 categories is what we've done. And then next slide, please. There are also some things that we found when we were doing meta-analysis across all the 19 categories that we thought were interesting for everyone to know, and we obviously couldn't put it in the dashboard because these are insights that we've identified. And what we've done is we've put them in different thought leadership pieces that are available. The first one is reach and the relationship between reach and quality. So that white paper came out a couple of months ago. And then how touch points impact the consumer journey in different ways. And then the one thing that I wasn't able to talk to you about earlier is synergy, the unplanned impact. And what that means is when you put 2 or 3 touch points together, the impact that they have is greater than basically just 1 plus A plus B plus C. So synergy means the impact isn't A plus B plus C. It's basically A plus B plus C plus Z. So that's basically synergy. It's impact that you hadn't planned for because you're looking at touch points individually. But when you put them all together and then different combinations, you get this additional impact for your campaign that you weren't aware of previously. And each of these white papers basically end with reminders or rules in touchpoint planning. Remember to consider what your touchpoint objectives are, whether it's for generating awareness, consideration, or purchase intent. Remember that the combination of newspapers and out of home is much stronger than, say, a combination of social media and radio for this particular category. Remember that you're not just looking at reach, you're also looking at the impact that your campaign has on the brand. It's not just about reaching people, it's not just about exposure, it's also about the quality of the experience that your audience has with your brand. So those insights, as well as data backing them up, are all put into these white papers, thought leadership pieces that are available to anyone who asks for them. They're publicly available on SPH's website right now. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, and that was it, actually. So that was the meat of the presentation, introducing Connect to everyone on this call, explaining what it was about, showing you what the outputs could be for users and advertisers. And now we will go on to the panel discussion, where we are looking forward to answering the questions from the audience. And to start us off, I will start by asking questions. to our esteemed panelists. And I will start with you, Cheng, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, so the first question I wanted to ask you is, why exactly did SPH commission this study with Kantar in the first place?
That's a question I think everybody will be interested to know. Okay, we have done touchpoint studies in the past at SPH, so this is not the first time. The reason why we wanted to partner with you guys, there are a few reasons. One is we wanted definitely to know that, okay, for example, for a long time, we know that reach and frequency, RNF, is no longer the single most critical metric. So we wanted to know what would be the impact and quality of the touch points, especially in a landscape where advertisers, they can choose any type of media for their plan. So it doesn't have to be skewed to a specific media. So secondly, by the sheer fact that we are servicing so many categories and brands, and there is no single study. There are many different types of study that we have to compile, basically to understand the effectiveness, the impact of what advertisers are spending, even post-campaign analysis. So this study was important, and to work with you guys is basically because we needed to know multi-categories across basically media neutral planning. And that was like one of the key reasons. And at this moment, I can say that this is definitely the single most updated, comprehensive, and relevant brand study that is quite scalable, because there's 19 categories. So for brands that wants to get insights on campaign planning, this is currently the most relevant.
Cool. Thank you very much. Pablo, let's go to you. So you and I both have a media agency background. We've both made our rounds in the media agency industry. And with the agencies that we've been in, we all have access to some sort of a planning tool or a planning platform that agencies and planning teams use to develop campaigns and make media recommendations, right? So how is Connect, the one that we have with SPH, different from those planning platforms, you think?
Oh, so yes, you're right. And hello, everyone. Yes, it's, all the media agencies essentially has a similar platforms in some way, but Connect is slightly different. The first thing, it was created by Kantar, which we are, let's say, globally the leaders on brand equity, understanding and how brands work, and how we also see things from a consumer perspective too. So the difference with the typical touchpoint planning is that the focus of this tool is actually to really deep dive into what consumers think about a category and how they relate and interact with the different touchpoints, and understanding how these impact the brand. Because as you showed before, Connect is focused on how the different touchpoints, paid, owned, and earned, are impacting the brand equity. So the difference it's a complement to those tools. I'm not saying that those tools are not right. I think it's a very good complement.
Of course, yeah.
But this is like a first step. It's a deep dive, I always call it like a UNA of touchpoints, where actually we deep dive and we really understand how the category works. It's not focusing one brand, as you said. It's focused on comparing all the different brands and where the opportunities exist. So it's a very good overview, like a very good first step on optimizing your channel planning. And then, of course, will be a great complement with the expertise from the media agencies, actually, to then laser focus on the learnings and go, okay, how can I optimize then these touch points using the planning tools, of course. But yeah, that could be the main difference. It's more like an overview, how understanding the category, the consumer, and how this is impacting your brand.
Thanks, Pablo. And that leads me to you, Vineet, because the next question is related to what I asked Pablo. And unlike Pablo and myself, you're still with an agency, so you're basically running strategy for the creative and the media sides, and you have access to one of these planning tools that we just asked earlier. So now that you have an idea of what Connect can do, how do you think Connect adds value to the planning process for either or both media and the creative?
Yeah, I think there are various aspects to how Connect kind of a tool can help media agencies. One is to just identify the right KPIs that the brand should focus on. Definitely a competitive analysis where I am stronger than my competition. And a third aspect, I think, is more about an optimization of budgets. So that's where a lot of modeling comes into picture. And that's where I think Connect adds a lot of value. In fact, at Havas, we have a similar kind of a tool which we use to identify various challenges across the consumer decision journey. And then we are able to feed it into another tool. So as you are talking about, the agencies have various tools. So this is another budget optimization tool, which helps us identify, help us understand what are the various relationships in terms of reach frequency, how can budget be properly optimized using various touch points. So, and that all tied back to the KPI that the brand has. So I think in that sense, it's very critical for media planning, from a media planning perspective. However, from a creative perspective, I think earlier we saw a chart where we had a experience on one axis and reach on one axis. So in that perspective, if we are able to deep dive into the experience part, where our brand is lacking or where our brand strengths are, then we are able to identify more opportunities from a creative perspective. Yeah, but that needs a very specific deep dive.
Yep, agree.
And
Thank you, Vineet. Oh, sorry, Pablo.
I think also one of the things I think were great is the collaboration between, what we do in Kantar, of course, the brand, and also with Havas at the media agency. We do a lot of workshops, as you know, Chito, we do a lot. It's not just showing the results and, okay, that's it. There is a lot of conversation around, okay, so we do it in a workshop style when we present the results, and we work together with the experts, the media experts like Vineet and the team, in order to give a final good recommendation of this is how you need to focus on how to optimize your media. So it's a very collaborative work, let's say. It's not just a one-way presentation.
Thanks, Pablo. There is a question from the floor, and I think this one is for you, Cheng. And the question is, how do we subscribe to this service?
Currently for this first round, we have basically paid for it because we ourselves were curious to understand how the brands are performing. Going forward, because it does, as Chito has mentioned, it took us close to 18 to 24 months to prepare this. If we were to do any next wave, there will be some additional costs involved. But for the current study, if you are interested to get a hold of the category of brand that you are keen to understand, please approach the relevant sales lead that you are in touch with, or our agency partnership lead, because there'll be properties, there are already white papers as well as category study that's out, so we can show that to you. In terms of the dashboard, currently a lot of the reports that is actually being churned out. Whatever is on the dashboard, the main study is churned out on the reports. So that is something that you can also approach our sales leads to get access to.
Thank you. There is another question, and I think this one is for me. The question is, what are the white papers about? So the white papers, there are 3 white papers that we came out with. The first was analyzing reach and impact. The second one was looking at the touch point impact on each of the segments of the purchase funnel, consumer journey. And the third one was basically analyzing synergy. So from a broad perspective, these are topics or insights that you won't be able to find on the dashboard, because the dashboard is basically data and charts and tables and whatever permutation that you want them to come out in. But there are some things like, and I think I brought it up, and I keep bringing this up because this is the one thing it's the one thing that's hard to explain, is the synergy impact. So topics like that, basically little ideas or principles like that won't show up in the dashboard, and that we've been able to identify based on analyzing all of the data that we did for SPH, is what the white papers are all about. So for example, the impact of touch points across different segments of the consumer journey, which is the second white paper, we basically looked at commonalities and anomalies across the different categories in terms of the touch point impact across awareness, consideration, and purchase intent, and wrote down all the findings that we found that might be interesting to readers and for advertisers, and put them all together in a white paper. It isn't very technical. We did our best to make it very user-friendly and laymanized as much as we can, and it's fairly easy to read, in the sense that, we found that a combination of out of home and radio, it works really well for, say, the property category because of the synergy impact, but it doesn't do as well in other categories that we took a look at. So it's little nuggets of information like that that basically helps you expand your understanding of what touchpoint impact is all about. So there are 3 of them. And I'm sure Cheng and her team are going to be happy to send you those white papers if you request for them.
Yes, sure. Yeah, we have the white paper on our SPH site. But just to add on to the earlier point for the reports, while you are able to get access via the sales leads or agency partnership leads, I think it's also it would be good to also have a conversation, because this is a whole new set of data. So there are certain data set that you may want to have like greater understanding of actually what the data means. So when you receive the report and you do want to have a dialogue about this, please feel free to approach us.
Okay. One more question, Pablo. This one's for you. So SPH is a client of Kantar's for Connect here in Singapore. So we've done a study for them across 19 categories. Are there other clients of Kantar who have done a Connect study? And if so, what did they use it for?
Yes, there are other Kantar clients that have run Connect studies. We have run more, I don't know the exact or the latest figure, but we have run about 1,000 around the world. So that was actually created, it's a tool that was actually created in Germany. I think it was 3-4 years ago for a specific automotive client. And now it started to expand way more to all the categories. Pretty much we have run connects for all the categories you can imagine. I think the main question we have when a client comes to us and we say, because of course they don't know the tool, and we don't have a lot of clients coming and say, I want to connect a study. Some of them, they're repeating yes, but if they don't know the tool, of course. But the question they come to us is like, I really want to understand how to connect better with my consumers. And we are receiving a lot of requests, especially in this second half of last year and beginning of this year, because of the new situation. So we are all talking about the new normal, how the world is still changing, and we are not out, unfortunately, we are not out of the pandemic, and it's going to take a while. We have a lot of marketeers coming and say, I want to really understand how consumers now are using media. We know that, and it's not just digitalization, we also have a lot of data that proves, for example, consumers are using more radio, but they're using a different way. They used to, a lot of them in many countries, listening the radio, for example, when they were in the car. In many cases, because of the limitations to go to the office, this is not happening. They are listening the radio at home. And it's so just a simple example, but the way consumers are using media channels is changing. That's why we have a lot of clients actually, they do really want to understand, okay, I have this specific consumer, but everything has changed. I really want to understand how they are now using, and if there are new opportunities. Are new channels that I can think about? Are they the old channels that I need to revisit because consumers are more time at home? This is probably, I think, in the last few months, has been a lot of requests we have received that way, and how, actually the clients are using that is really to take advantage of, okay, I know consumers in this new normal or new situation.
Thanks, Pablo. So there's a question from the floor, and I was going to ask this question of Cheng myself if no one was going to ask it. If Cheng, as the study is commissioned by SPH, is it going to be biased for SPH ad platforms?
No, because it is impossible to just, as much as we want to just do a pure study for SPH, I think it will be quite meaningless, because when somebody plans media, they won't just plan using just SPH media. So we have to do a media agnostic study that covers all platforms. But obviously, when it came to our own analysis, we pick our own platforms to deep dive and study more into it. But this entire study from the 19 categories does include all the other media, including new updated media that is probably not in some of the touchpoint studies that some of the other companies are doing. So we think that this is important because If we don't have that, we won't have a very comprehensive view of what is actually going on out there. So yes, it is not just SPH platforms.
Got it. Thank you. There's a couple more questions here. Where's the first one? Okay. There's a question there's someone asking if Connect is based on categories case studies reports. Is it not a tool that we can use as a pre-planned analysis? I suppose that one is for me. So Connect is a study. It isn't basically just case study. So what we've done was we've done the study across 19 categories and across 300 plus brands and touch points, and all of the data from those studies are inside the dashboard that we showed you earlier. So it isn't a case study report. It isn't just a case study report. Like I said earlier, what you can do is you can go into the dashboard and you can basically find different permutations of the information that you want based on the objective that you're trying to achieve and based on the target audience that you're trying to reach. So it's very flexible that way. It isn't just a PowerPoint report that we give out and say, this is the output that Connect has. Everything that you need is in there. Go. It isn't like that. There are reports like that, mostly for people who just want to see the highlights. But if there are things that you need to take a look at for your planning, basically different permutations, then the dashboard, the online dashboard will be able to give you that flexibility for planning. It isn't a fixed thing. It's basically a free-flowing database of information that you can use to whatever purpose you need it for, basically. And I think that was it. Did we answer all the questions that the audience has?
I think there is a question about if is and the categories. Is payment and financial categories included? I guess your question isn't there.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the 19 categories are, but I can tell you for sure that the financial services category is there. Telco is there. Supermarkets are there. Automobiles is there. And there are more. Sorry, I just can't remember them off the top of my head. And if whoever asked me that wants to send me an email, so I have his contact detail, I can respond with the specifics of the study. Okay, there's a couple more questions. Cheng mentioned that the study was in the making for about 24 months, which is 2 years. During this period of time, lots have changed, such as the occurrence of the pandemic. How accurate is the report then on reflecting the trend, seeing that consumer trends kind of changed overnight? Pablo, do you want to take that one?
Just go ahead if you want to. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, let me repeat the question. So the study was done over a period of 24 months, 18 to 24 months. And in that time, we've seen a lot of things happen, like the pandemic hitting and a lot of media consumption patterns changing. And if that's the case, if that's the scenario we are in, are the findings from Connect still relevant for planning right now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not that just we did it 2 years ago, I think, the report. I think is that the data actually has been updated and we see trends and changes. So, of course, what is relevant is actually that Connect needs to be updated every certain time and with changes. But it doesn't mean, I think that's a confusion, is that it's not that we did it 2 years ago. Actually, we're capturing the data during a period of time, actually. So we see actually the trends and how this is changing, if that makes sense.
Cool. Thanks, Pablo.
Yeah, we started designing, but it's actually, that's why, as you mentioned, Connect, we cover more than 30 different touch points. It's very open. It's actually, and yes, there can be new touch points coming in that we didn't plan before, but it's not probably possible. But essentially what we have done is a wide overview of all the touch points. And then of course we will see some touch points, and we have been seeing some touch points changing during the last 2 years that are more important than they were before. As you mentioned, Chito, in your presentation, how consumers have been changing their media consumption in the last, especially during last year, during the COVID-19. Yeah.
And just to add to what Pablo's saying, it isn't that consumer trends and consumption habits changed overnight. They were already starting to see the trends and changes. Like more people are using digital media, less people are watching television or reading the newspapers. That sort of trend has been happening for a while. It's just that when COVID hit, it acted as a sort of accelerant, basically, to hasten these trends and changes that we're seeing around us. And so while Connect isn't going to give you 100% accurate recommendation of what you need to do for your media plan or for your marketing mix, what it will do is to give you a baseline understanding of which touch points work in which situations, and then you work from there, basically. Is that how it's done? Okay, so I think we've actually gone a few minutes past what we said, how much time we said we would. And I'm going to wrap up with this final question, which is how to sign up for Connect. So I think Cheng answered that a little bit earlier. And Cheng, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, if you want to sign up for Connect, you need to speak to SPH. And if you're from a category that's not within the 19 categories that we've already done the Connect study for, then Kantar will be able to help you with that as well. So just reach out to either SPH or Kantar and we will be able to help you. And I think that is it for our discussion and for our presentation this morning. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope that was useful and interesting to everybody on the call. If you want to download the white paper, you can visit imsph.sg white paper or scan the QR code below that you can see on your screens. If there's anything that you want to ask us about, any further questions you might have on the presentation that we weren't able to cover, just email mkgtrade@sph.com.sg and we will be able to help you there. So on behalf of SPH and Kantar and the panelists who joined me on the call earlier today, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a pleasant day ahead.